Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the 20 and 20 Challenge. This is week 16, and today we're going to be taking a look at taking the API we created in week 15. We're going to be recreating it, but essentially the same API, and moving it from a local API that just runs on our machine to one that lives on a DigitalOcean app that we make requests to from our local Vue to-do list. We're not going to be recreating the Vue to-do list. We're going to be cloning that, but we are going to be creating the API from scratch just so that you can sort of see how quickly you can launch a API or a similar Rails project to a DigitalOcean Apps platform thing. One thing to note, though, and I do mention this later in the video, because DigitalOcean Apps use the local file system and continuously reset it during each iteration, and an iteration is anytime you push up code, your database will not persist, which means if you do want a persistent database, you will have to pay an additional, I think, $7 a month for that, or host an additional database off of DigitalOcean. Now, on that note, I will have an affiliate code down in the video description, and you can use that for, I think, 2 months of free hosting. And then after that, if you pay $25 at any point, they also credit me $25. So it's sort of a win-win there. In the sense that you get 2 months of free hosting, and then if you ever put money towards it, they give me a bit of a kickback, which helps me make more of these videos. But that's enough for me. Let's go ahead and let's jump into some code. Okay, so before we get started, I just want to point out that I do have a DigitalOcean affiliate code that you can use. I'll have this in the video description. And the basic premise is you get $100 in credit over 60 days. So this is no cost to you. And then after the 60-day period, if at any point you spend $25, they'll credit me $25. So this is no cost to you, and it just gives me $25 in additional hosting fees that I can then use to make more of these videos. So it helps me out, and hopefully it helps you out too. If that's something you're interested in, there will be a link in the video description. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a Rails app. So we're going to say Rails new, and I'll just call this production API. And then I'll just pass in -- API, which tells Rails to make this as an API, which also means the generator command runs pretty fast. So now let's go ahead and let's cd into this new app, and then we'll say code dot to open this up in Visual Studio Code. And at this point, I can show you the application we're going to be using for this. So this is based on the previous week's tutorial. I'll have like a card or something for you to check out. But the basic idea is we have a to-do list app that lets you mark things as completed and delete them and filter by them. But we don't have any of that implemented in this clone of that API. And I just figured, this is a good way to show you how to make a very quick API, probably in like 10 minutes, and then push it up to DigitalOcean. So we're going to go through some of this again, but we're not going to be making the Vue part of this. We're actually going to be cloning the Vue part of this from my GitHub repository. And there will be a link to this in the video description when we get to this point, so don't worry about it. But what we're going to do is we're going to start by coming into our gem file, and we're going to find this rack cores gem, and I'm going to zoom in a bit so you can see this. And we're just going to uncomment this, save, and then we can run a bundle command to install this. We can then come into our config and our routes.rb, and in here we just want to create some namespaces. So we'll say namespace API do. Do. Then we'll say namespace v1 do. And then we'll add in our route here in a second. So for this, we'll just say we need some to-dos. So we'll say Rails G scaffold to-dos. Each to-do will have a title, and it will have a completed of type Boolean. And we can go ahead and run this generator. And then once it's done running that, we should see our resources appear here. We'll just move these into our namespaces. And this is just going to change our route. So instead of going to /todos, we'll go to /API/v1/todos. So if you want to version your API, you can just make another namespace for v2, and you won't ruin your old API's functionality, hopefully. But what we can do now that we've generated those to-dos, we can come into the database, migrations right here. You can set the default for this to be false, and then save that. And then we can run a Rails db:/migrate command because we're basically done setting up the database at this point. So the next thing we can do is come into app controllers and the to-dos controller. We're going to have to move this. So we can say new folder under controllers, call this API, create a new folder under API, call that V1. And then we can move the to-dos controller into this V1 folder. Just turn off my speakers. And then we can come into this to-dos controller here, and we'll just say this has a namespace. So we need to change this to API : V1 : to-dos controller. Oops. And then let's full screen this real quick. And then we have our @todos here. So if you'll remember from the previous episode, we do limit the to-dos. So when you click this button, it sends in a parameter up here, and we filter based on that. So we'll just say limit is equal to params : _limit. And then we just say if the limit is present. So this is just if it's not null and it's not empty, then we cast it to an int. And then we say @todos equals @todos.last of the limit. End. And then we can backspace this. And then at the end here, we just reverse these so we get the newest ones first. So that's basically all we did here. We did come down to the create method, I believe, and we changed this location to instead redirect to API _V1 _todos _path. And then we just pass this in. And then I think the last thing we have to do in here, no pun intended, is come down to our to-do params. And I think we said give it the ID. And then we also have that limit that we have to do, which is this _limit, right? And once that's done, we can probably save this, move this back over, and then let's try starting our server and seeing if this works. So we'll say Rails S. We'll come over to localhost port 3000. That seems to work. We're getting an error here for an icon that's missing probably. And let's come over to API /V1 /todos. And it looks like that's working. Let's just try to make a quick to-do just to make sure. So we'll say to-do equals to-do.new, to-do.title equals hello world, to-do.save. And then we can just say Rails S again, and then we'll refresh this page, and we now have a to-do here. Okay, so that's our API done in a nutshell. And then if we were to come over to here and refresh, actually, this one's not the right one. So we need to actually grab our local copy of the front end from last time so that we can see what this looks like. So if you come over to the GitHub repo, and there will be a link to this in the video description. If you come over to week 15 of the 20 and 20 repository, click on that. You'll want the video and the front end. So this URL right here is what I need to put in the show notes. But basically you come in here, you want to clone this specific part, or you can clone the whole repository. And then if you have the whole repository, we can back out of this real quick. We can say cp-r, and then we need week 15 video front end. We want to copy this to, for me, it's week 16, and then I'll just copy it into my Rails folder. And if that worked the way that I think it did, I have all of my node modules in there because I'm a big dum-dum. You probably won't have the node modules, but we cd into week 16, production API, and then the front end. So assuming you copied this folder into your Rails app properly, you should then be able to say npm install to install your node modules. I'm just doing this again so that you have, so you can see what this actually looks like. I'm pretty sure I just copied all the node modules over, but we can just do it this way. So once that's done, we can then say npm run serve. And it should start doing whatever it needs to in order to serve the application. I do actually need to stop this one from running because it's trying to run the second one at 8081, which I don't want right now. There we go. And now if I come in here and I refresh, it's telling me there's no to-dos. But if I say test, submit, we don't have our Rails app running. So let's cd into my repository here, code 20 and 20, week 16, production API, and then Rails S. So this will be my back end, and this will be my front end console for right now. So if we refresh, it's going to yell at us about something. I assume I'm in the right location. Yep, this looks fine. I don't have the CORS policy set up, of course, so that's why it's upset. So let's go ahead and let's set up the CORS policy real quick. We already did the bundle install, so now we need to come into config, initializers, and the CORS.rb, and we need to uncomment all of this. And what we need to do now is we need to whitelist our URL. So here we have localhost port 8080. So for our origins, let's say http://localhost 8080. And then we can save that and refresh. Oops, and refresh. And it's still upset. It's telling us it can't find this. Okay, apparently I just had to restart my server and now it works. So make sure you restart your server after that. And now you should see the to-do list app working as it should. So we can just add in a couple to-dos here, and you can see we have a whole bunch. We'll filter them, filter by 5. Now there's only 5 here. And you can see the Hello World one doesn't appear. But okay, so this is what we did last week. Nothing here is new. How do we take this and make it so that this API is something that is being shown to or exposed to the whole world as opposed to something that's just sitting here on my local computer? So there's a couple ways you can do this. You can use a regular server to host it, which, as you guys know from a production tutorial I put out a while ago, that can take up to 30 minutes or longer to set up properly. Now, if you just have a quick API that you need to get up and running and you don't necessarily care about persistence, you have the option of the DigitalOcean apps. So basic idea here is these apps, they're a very quick way to fire up a Rails production environment. The issue is you're paying $5 for the ability to have your Rails app running in a production environment, but you don't have a lot of control over that environment. And one of the drawbacks with that, based on what I found while making this video, is the file system is not persistent. So the way they work, it's similar to Heroku. Whenever you push up a change, so if we were to, say git init this repository, push it up to GitHub, and then pull it down onto this machine would automatically update. But of course, if it's automatically updating and automatically creating and deleting files, your database will also live on this. So whenever it resets the file system to rebuild the app, it's going to also reset the database. Now you can add in an extra database, but the problem with that is it's another $7 a month. So at that point, you're paying $12 a month, I believe, for the ability to have a persistent database. So for this one, we're just going to work on setting up a basic API, and we're going to work under the assumption that your API is processing information and not saving it. I realized for a to-do list app that doesn't make any sense, but it was just an API-based app that I had laying around, and I figured I already covered how to make it. So if you want to see how to make it, you can go learn, and maybe you'll just connect a database up anyways. Okay, so how do we do this? Well, if you come over to DigitalOcean, sign in, you can go to, let me full screen this. Go to DigitalOcean, it'll take you to projects, you then come to apps, and chances are it'll take you to some onboarding screen. So we can say create app. Hopefully you'll get to a point where it asks you to select a GitHub repository after connecting your GitHub to your DigitalOcean account. At this point, we need a repository to link this to. So what we have to do is come over to GitHub, and we have to click the little plus in the top right, say new repository. For this, we'll say, I don't think congenial meme is a good repository name, no offense. We'll just say something like to do API, and we'll go with that. We'll leave it as a public repository. We don't need to add anything, and we'll just say create the repository. Once this is created, it'll give us some commands here that we can run in our terminal. So let's move this over here, and let's come over to our Rails app, because this is the root of our application, and we can start running these. So first thing we'll do, it's saying echo add a to do it README. We already have a README. It comes with Rails by default, so we don't need that. We can then say git init. We can, we don't need to add the repo, but we can do all of these things. So we can say git add, and we'll add all the files in here with git add dot. We'll then say git commit -am, and we'll just say init commit. That adds all our files. Then we can say git branch -m main. Git remote add origin, and I'm actually just going to copy this, paste it in here, and then we can say push to the origin main. And once this is done, we can then refresh the GitHub page, and you'll see you have your whole GitHub repository here, README included. Okay, so now if we come back over to DigitalOcean after pushing that up and we refresh, give it a second to think. We should now be able to come into the repository selection and look for, it looks like I called this to do API, and there it is, to do API. Then we'll click next. Now we'll name this. I'll just leave mine as to do API, region New York, branch main, auto deploy code changes. That seems fine. So this right here is the thing where if you push to your branch, this will automatically update. But okay, we'll hit next. And right here, you can see it says Ruby on Rails detected. We want it to run as a web service. That's fine. We have some HTTP routes, environment variables, build command, Rails server. All of that seems fine. Here, you can add a database. Again, it says only if your app needs a database. For this one, we'll say it doesn't, but what happens if I say yes? You have the option of using an existing database you already have on DigitalOcean or a development database for $7 a month, which again is not recommended for production. Of course, you probably want to use an actual database from DigitalOcean because that'll allow you to scale it more easily, and it's on like a separate thing. But okay, we won't add a database. We'll just hit next. And then it'll ask us which plan we want. We want this basic one, which is $5 a month. And the basic size here, we're going to resize it from 10 to 5 a month. And then we can say launch basic app. And this will go ahead, create the application. And then you can start seeing, if I move quick enough, and I'll full screen this, right here, you have a progress bar. It's going to go through and it's going to do all of the deployment stuff it normally does. The first one will probably run a little bit slower, but the basic idea is it's adding, it's doing all the Heroku stuff. So you have, adding Ruby, installing all the gems, which of course includes Rails because Rails is a gem. It then goes through, it'll do everything short of migrating the database initially. Okay, and now that that's done, let's come over to the live app to take a look, and we can see that the page can't be found. It's telling us HTTP error 404. So if we come back over to our app, the one thing we do need to do after setting up the actual application itself, or every time we push, is run a Rails db:/migrate command. And this is just so that we can migrate the database, and that'll actually create it for us, which is something that the default setup here doesn't do. Now you could probably add this as a post, like the run command. So maybe do something like, let me see. You could probably do something like Rails db:/migrate and then do this. So I think this will migrate the database and then it'll run the server command. But okay, let's leave this alone for now. We just migrated the database. Let's go ahead and let's try to open up the app again. It's still telling us it can't find the application. And that's because there's no routes at the root level, I believe. So if we do /API/v1/todos, that takes us to our empty to-dos page. So if we come back over to our console here, we can then say Rails C. This should still work as expected. And this will open up the Rails console where we can then create a like example to do that we can display on the page. So we'll just say to-do.create. We'll say the title is equal to hello again world. That'll create it. And let's come over here, refresh the page, and there's our to-do. So how do we now access this from our front end? Because remember, we stopped our server from running, which means if I refresh this, we no longer have any to-dos showing up because the back end isn't running and we're failing this. Well, thankfully, we still have this set to allow origins from localhost port 8080. Now, of course, you could set this to allow basically anything. I think it's just a comma separated list after origins. And you can also set the resources to allow only like stuff from /API/v1 or whatever. Oops. But if we want to actually connect to this application we have here, we need to copy this URL. So Control-A, Control-C, that copies it. And in our front end or wherever you're trying to access your API from, because chances are you won't be following this exact tutorial, you'll have your own application or whatever. In my case, it's in store modules todos.js. I have one overall API URL. And before I was pointing to localhost port 3000 because I was serving Rails from port 3000. And then I had /API/v1/todos. But instead, let's paste in this link right here, which is the link to our app /API/v1/todos. We'll save that. You'll see this hot reload here. You can come over here, refresh, and there's our hello again world to-do item. We can double click it, set it to completed. We can refresh. We could even like stop the server, start the server again. It'll still be running. And it's doing all of that from this application that we're hosting up in the cloud and not from our local machine. Now, this is great because this will continue to exist. The issue is, again, if we push any changes to our code, this is going to wipe this database. So if you do need that type of persistence, I would recommend coming over to components and saying, hey, I need a database. But you can also do like workers or static sites or anything like that if you need to. And if you want to point a domain to one of these apps, I believe that's also something you can, right here. So you can edit the domain and point one of your domains at your DigitalOcean API. So instead I could point like one of my domains like dnout.com to this, and then I could say dnout.com/API/v1/todos instead. But okay, let's just go in and let's see how we can update this application a little bit just so that it's, so you can see how that works. Okay, so let's do a Rails G scaffold and let's add in, I don't know, instead of to-dos, we'll say to-dones. That'll generate a scaffold. Oops. And then let's say Rails G migration, add name to dones. We'll say a name is a type string, right? Then we can do a Rails db:/migrate command. And then if we come up here, we can move the to-dones into our API. We'll move them. And then let's open up the to-dones controller. And we'll say this is also API:/v1::. We can save that. And then I think for the parameters, we have params.require to-done.permit name. You can save that. That should work. And then we have to come into our config and our routes.rb, and we have to move these into our scoped block right here. Okay, and then let's say let's try Rails S first, just to make sure this actually works. So we'll go to localhost port 3000, that works, /API/v1/todos. That has stuff in it, that's also good. And then we can say, what about to dones? So to dones. Okay, so that seems to work. And then we'll say Rails C, and then to done.create name test. We'll drop out of this and we'll start the server again. Just make sure all of this is working. Okay, so we can create to dones. That's pretty neat. Now we want to add this to our production app so that we can come in here and go to dones. So right now that doesn't work. So how do we change that? Well, let's do a git status. We have these files that we added. So let's do a git add dot to add all of them. We can do a git status again just to check. And then we'll say git commit add to dones to application. We can save that. We can do a git push. And then as soon as we do this git push, we come over to deployments, we should see DigitalOcean pick up that there's new stuff on the repository. And as soon as it does, you'll see it start rebuilding. And that's all it takes. So this will take, a couple seconds to a couple minutes probably. I think they capped it out at anywhere from 20 to 60 minutes that your build can take. But on average, I've noticed it takes about probably 5 minutes or so. And once it's done, this will be accessible at the URL that we tried over here. Okay, and now that that's done, let's come over here and try to refresh the page, and you'll see that it's unable to handle this request. Why is it unable to handle this request? Well, again, we have to come over to our console and run a Rails db:/migrate command. And after we run this, we'll then be able to access this application just like we were previously. So here you can see it created both of those. And then if we come over here, refresh, we now have our to-dones. If we come over here to our to-do list, assuming this is still running, it is. If we refresh, you'll see that our to-do is gone. And that's because we don't have that database persistence that we would have if we had come over to our components, clicked create, and added a database. But that's going to do it, I guess, for me. And now I'm going to go ahead and move over to the outro video. Okay, so that's going to do it for this week's episode. I realize at this point saying this week seems a little bit ridiculous because I've been uploading these on a sporadic basis. But hopefully this video provided you with some value and helped you figure out how to create a production API. And if it did, remember to like the video. If it didn't help you, remember to dislike it so we don't subject other people to more bad tutorials. And if you're interested, I do have some more of these videos coming out in the near future. So maybe consider subscribing. I think next I'm probably going to be taking a look at doing a dedicated Postgres tutorial because I know that that's an area where people struggle with. So hopefully I can clear that up in the next video, which will probably be out tomorrow. But for now, that's going to do it for me. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day.